This episode of The Energy Show is proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, the federal solar tax credits literally turbocharged the solar industry's growth. 30% tax credit makes solar affordable for many homes and businesses and even utilities. Plus, it makes solar leasing and PPAs viable. Now, there's similar tax credits now from the IRA for heat pumps and home electrification. The long-term nature of these tax credits helps customers and companies plan. So I'm going to go in a little bit of background about this. And it's fascinating from people that have been in the business for 20-something years. But in 2005 and 2006, with President Bush, the first 30% solar tax credit was put in place, but there was a $2,000 residential cap. Then in the 2008 Great Recession, once again, with solar-friendly President Bush, the ITC was uncapped for residential, and then we keep going until 2026. Now, here's the fact. The little-known horse trading. The fossil fuel industry got to export oil and gas in exchange for renewable energy tax credits. So, ironically, that helped the solar industry, and it raised gas prices. So just kind of continuing to move ahead, 2014 with Obama, the tax credit was extended to 2023 with a step down. And in 2022 with Biden, with the IRA, it's 30%. It's called the Residential Clean Energy Credit through 2035. So it's terrific. And then there's also lots of energy efficiency, heat pump rebates, things like that. So here we are, end of 2024. The Trump administration is not really a fan of clean energy tax credits or incentives. So it's very likely that there will be some changes to tax credit laws. And candidly, we really don't know what will happen. But we're really worried that we're going to lose that 30% tax credit and lose some of the IRA rebates. So people are asking me, and everybody in the industry is scratching their head what to do, how to figure this out. And for the best answer, I turn to the smartest person I know about federal energy policy. He's been in the trenches for years, and that person's my friend Rhone Resch. He's currently president and CRO of Solarlytics, and he helps companies at Solarlytics maximize their energy production, mostly for large-scale power plants. But previously, Rhone was the genius at SEIA from 2004 to 2016. He led the charge in all these tax credits and really got us to where we're going right now. So he knows better than anyone else how solar tax credits are made, modified, and maybe murdered. So welcome to the show, Rhone.
Hey, Barry, thanks for having me.
All right, so just tell us a little bit about Solarlytics so people know what you're doing since your tenure at SEIA.
Sure. Yeah, we founded Solarlytics to really focus on maximizing production from utility scale and C&I solar assets. We found that not just degradation of modules, but frankly, the entire DC side of the bus tends to have some pretty massive problems. And so we created a company that is focused on providing that solution, both with hardware, so it's a string level optimizer that we created, but also with software. And we collect massive amounts of data every 30 seconds. Voltage, current, temperature, et cetera. We send it to the cloud. We use machine learning algorithms to analyze that data to specifically identify what those problems are in the field. So if you're an asset owner, this gives you the ability to not only know that the patient's sick, but why the patient's sick and how to correct it in the field if our system can't do it automatically. So our whole intention here is to try to maximize the clean energy production from the existing assets that we've already installed in this country, and also to develop a smarter way for new build assets to address some of the challenges that we face in the design and operation of solar plants going forward.
All right, and it makes sense. We have that need, and the utility scale market's really continuing to be robust. But in the meantime, let's get down to the gory details of solar tax credits. So first question, what are the voting requirements for changing the current tax credit rules?
So, there's a couple different ways to look at the tax credits themselves, right? So the tax credits, as you pointed out, I think very smartly, have evolved over time. And in fact, back in 2005, when we got them created, it was both a Republican House, Republican Senate, and as you pointed out, a Republican president, right? So we had the kind of the same setup that we have in 2025 when we started this all back in 2004. But there's a couple of different, I think, techniques that or processes that the Republicans can use to adjust the tax credits. Historically, you would go through a tax bill, you'd make some adjustments, basically going through committee, through the Ways and Means Committee and the Finance Committee, and it would go out to ultimately to a full vote of the House and the Senate, and then the president would sign it. That's a typical tax package. That's how we most often created and then expanded some of the tax credits. But the truth of the matter is things have changed, and budget reconciliation was the process in which the IRA was created. You only need 51 votes in the Senate to pass a budget reconciliation. You don't need 60. You don't need, a filibuster-proof majority. And so it's a technique that can be used much more effectively to pass big pieces of legislation or big spending measures that one party wants to see. And so I think as we start to look at what this current incoming administration wants to do, it's very clear that the budget reconciliation process will be used to drive both policy as well as tax adjustments early in 2025.
All right. So I remember one of the important distinctions when we were negotiating these things is the difference between the residential and the commercial credits, between Section 25 and Section 48. How do you think that's going to play out? Because there seems to be different levels of support for residential versus commercial/utility scale.
Yeah, that's an excellent insight, Barry, and it is going to be a little bit challenging. All right. I mean, in general, the Republicans like self-sufficiency. They like the concept of people being able to generate their own power. They like the off-the-grid types of approaches in the sense of making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And that would fall under Section 25, primarily if you own your solar system. That being said, utilities, as you know very well, do not like people putting solar on their homes. They do not like a decreased use of their power and their bills. And subsequently, you can fully expect that the Edison Electric Institute and other utilities will play a pretty aggressive role in helping to split the solar baby in two, so to speak. I think that Section 25, although it doesn't have a huge cost compared to Section 48, is one that is going to attract a lot of attention and frankly come under attack. So I think that will be treated very differently and unfortunately is going to be exposed to maybe some caps or maybe a cutoff in duration. But I also think that's going to be the case in Section 48 as well. It's a very effective measure. It was expanded in the IRA to include some adders, including domestic content, energy communities, low-income areas, et cetera. That's made it a very powerful tool for deploying solar. I think what you're going to see, at least for 48 and possibly for 25 as well, is that domestic content adder will not be an adder anymore. It will be a fundamental requirement. And if you step back and listen very carefully to what the incoming administration has said, they support domestic manufacturing. They support, kind of growth of businesses in the United States, and they support tariffs. And so if you were to put all the pieces together of how this administration might act going forward, you're going to see tariffs, right? We've already heard the 30% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and another 10% on China, and that will continue to grow. There's no question that this administration will support tariffs on, in the trade case, the manufacturers of modules in Southeast Asia, and that will probably expand as they move to other places in the Middle East and in Turkey and other areas. And so the tariffs are going to create an increase in price and perhaps a lower availability for just modules coming to the United States. But at the same time, I think we can anticipate the possibility, and this is just a possibility, that Section 48 will be linked to domestic content, that there needs to be a component of 50% or more domestic content in order to take the tax credit itself at that 30% level. It's not guaranteed, but you can very easily see how those two and three pieces are starting to fit together. And when you look at the language of both the House, the Senate, and certainly the incoming members of the administration, it would support that type of approach.
Yeah. So I'm looking at this, that the red states seem to be benefiting more from the tax credits and the incentives. And so I would almost think that the Section 48 credits would have more political support and more likely to survive. Is that something that you think is realistic?
Yeah, I do. I think 48 survives, but it gets modified, right? So you get rid of the low income incentive, you get rid of probably energy community, the domestic content becomes a requirement. So now you're at 30%. I don't know how they're going to treat the prevailing wage and, some of the other requirements to get to 30%. I would imagine those would go away. But I also think you get a haircut on the duration. These credits, they're not going to be, just removed, but I do think they're going to go in and surgically alter them in order to both have them comply with, let's just say, the ideals of income administration, but also to serve as a bit of a revenue raiser for other provisions that they're trying to support, including deportation, including extension of the Trump tax credits, which expire at the end of this year, and some of the other spending measures that they're going to be facing early in 2025.
Yeah, I see a lot of commentary now about the timing of these possible tax changes and whether it's done right away or whether it's done at the end of the year. But could you give us an idea, give people who are looking at solar an idea of if the credits are changed this year, when will it take effect? Or if the credits are voted and changed in 2026, when would it take effect?
Yeah, so this is super crystal ball stuff. Obviously, I talked to people in the transition team. I've had a number of conversations with them specifically about the tax credits. You have everybody who, on one side it says we're going to get rid of the ITC and the PTC completely, to those who are saying, no, there's going to be some small modifications. These are good for business. But I do think that it's going to be the budget reconciliation process that is going to take place. So if you step back and you look at kind of the drivers of what needs to be done in the government, you've got government funding expiring in March. You've got the debt ceiling expiring in June, and then you have the Trump tax credits expiring at the end of the year. Senator Thune, who is the majority leader in the Senate, has come forward and said, listen, we're going to do 2 budget reconciliation bills. The first one is going to be on energy, defense, and immigration. And the second one is going to be on tax specifically. Now, the solar industry, we kind of step back and like, okay, Section 4825, that's under tax. Even 45X, that's under tax. That won't be dealt with. But they are talking about under energy in the first reconciliation bill, getting rid of the $7,500 electric vehicle incentive. And I would imagine there will be several other provisions in there that will potentially be in the cutting block, specifically in that first bill. Now, the interesting thing about budget reconciliation you have to think about is you can pass a lot of policy provisions under budget reconciliation. So a lot of the stuff that's going to happen around immigration is going to happen through budget reconciliation. But there's also massive spending that has to support that in order for it to be implemented. And so you do see, these numbers, these billions of dollar numbers that are going to support this massive deportation piece of it. And budget reconciliation has to have more of a focus on the budget than it does on policy. So there's going to be an interesting balance here about how you split the IRA out between these 2 bills. Because, certainly you can do a number of things on taxes in the first bill under the category of energy to support defense and immigration issues. So what they've said from a timing perspective is it's going to be the very first bill that's introduced in Congress. They're going to do it literally the first couple of weeks. What I will say is that a budget reconciliation bill is not easy to get done. It takes a while. There's a lot of negotiation that has to go on back and forth. The Republicans have super small margins in the House, both after the election and then, of course, Trump's appointments. You're now down to a margin of 217 Republicans and 215 Democrats. So you only need to pull 2 away. or I should say, those three will be in very good position to negotiate for what they want in a budget reconciliation bill. And as you know, there's at least 18 Republicans who've signed on to letters supporting the IRA. So I'm giving a long-winded answer, and I apologize about that, but it's important to say that it's a top priority to get that first budget reconciliation bill done early. It's driven in large part by government funding expiring in March, but you have complications associated with it with respect to the number of Republicans that have to support it. It has to basically be all of them in the House. And so it does become complicated. The second bill on tax is interesting because you have the Ways and Means Chair, Smith, who's obviously a Republican, who's come out and said, hey, Thune, you've got it backwards. You got to start with tax, and then you can do the other stuff later. So you have the House a little bit split in the sense of what that priority is. The bill on tax is going to be complicated because it's going to be big. It's going to be very expensive to extend the Trump tax credits. It's going to be very expensive to do some of the other things that he has proposed that clearly they're trying to get done through a budget reconciliation process. The Democrats were pretty successful in doing it, I have to admit, but there's an art to doing the budget reconciliation that may not be as easy to exercise and be successful with as appears from the outside. So let's just say a first bill is probably a February to March timeframe to fit into that government funding. And then the next one, they're certainly going to try to get done by June, but it easily could take much longer because it's more complicated.
All right. So thinking back 10 years, 15 years to the challenges of getting both Section 48 and Section 25 done, commercial and residential. And if the Section 25 residential credits are eliminated or reduced, wouldn't that give new lease on life for all the third-party ownership residential systems using leases and PPAs?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, that's the case today. I think there's preferential treatment in the sense of how you can use Section 48 with some of the adders in order to get 40%, 50% when you're applying it through third-party ownerships on residential systems. So that already exists. There's no question that if 25 gets a haircut or gets phased down sooner, it would put certainly priority on TPO systems.
All right, and once again, thinking back, and you did a marvelous job of managing, keeping everybody under the same tent with this internecine warfare, sort of between Section 48, Section 25, residential TPO, residential cash. What advice do you have for the industry to try and keep everybody under the same happy growing tent?
I think finding a unifying message is important, right? We now have, about 35 gigawatts of module manufacturing capacity in the United States. That's thanks to 45X. It's up from whatever we were, 8 at the beginning of the IRA or when the IRA was passed. So it's pretty massive. And there may be a position that the industry takes to support domestic manufacturing requirements as part of the ITC for both 25 and 48. It's going to take a lot to get to that position, but it would play nicely into what the priorities are for the Republicans. You're making a bit of a compromise as an industry, but yet you're saving both of the provisions, and you may be able to extend or at least keep the duration of both of the provisions in place. My biggest fear is you stick domestic content on there and Congress comes back and says, okay, you've got that for 3 years and then we're going to phase it down, right? We'll go to 2010 and then it's done. And you get 5 years to figure it out, solar and wind and everybody else. And that's a very real reality. So I think in order to preserve the duration and the scale, meaning 30% of the ITC, the industry has to come together quickly with a very pro-US manufacturing position and apply it to both 25 and 48, and frankly, develop more Republican supporters than what we have today.
Yeah, well, it's always a challenge, but the need is there. You just look at the gap between our electrical consumption demands going forward and our ability to put transmission systems in that's going to keep up with that. You really, really need rooftop solar. All right, really good conversation about solar. Let's just change gears a little bit and talk about the IRA home electrification rebates, because a lot of people that we're working with are interested in putting in heat pumps and things like that. How would the rebates be interpreted with these possible changes in the tax code and the IRA?
Yeah, that has not been discussed as much at this point. One, because what's the word? It doesn't have as many opponents, right? Generally, both parties are supportive of energy efficiency. They're supportive of consumers spending money to upgrade their homes, electrifying them, et cetera. And so I think broadly speaking, there's less opposition to those. That being said, you can see a scenario where the natural gas industry, of which you have a huge influence in the incoming administration. I mean, my God, Chris Wright, the incoming DOE secretary, CEO of Liberty Energy, which is a big natural gas fracking company. Not that they, as a producer, are going to have an impact, but you can see AGA and some of the other natural gas companies saying, hey, this electrification thing has gone too far, right? We need to make sure that we're rolling back all of the regulations on natural gas stovetops and all the rest of that stuff that's happened, which, rightly so from a human health perspective. But you can see a scenario where the AGA and some of the other natural gas players are going to oppose some of the electrification provisions. Now, some of the rebates for home heat pumps, for example, I mean, that's an efficiency measure. That doesn't affect natural gas in any way, shape, or form. You're not using natural gas to cool your house, obviously to heat it in some scenarios, but it really depends, obviously, where you are. I would suspect that they're going to come up, but in a secondary measure later in the year. I don't think they're going to be part of the initial budget reconciliation processes. So there's going to be more of a debate about them. I think they remain at least through 2025, if not a little bit longer.
So among some of our customers, we've been hearing some rumors and issues related to the IRS auditing people who make ITC tax credit claims. So they're basically sending letters to many of our customers and solar customers all over the country, just simply asking for documentation that the solar panels and the inverters that they've installed are actually eligible for the tax credits. And I thought basically everything was eligible for the tax credits, but the IRS is pretty dogged, and they're actually asking for a letter from every single company that provides equipment to make sure that it's kosher. Now, the other thing is that it may catch people who are cheating on the tax credits, but we went through all the trouble of getting these letters, and it wasn't that easy from some manufacturers. And obviously, if you have manufacturers that disappear, go away, I don't know what the heck to do. But I'm just wondering, this is a non-legislative action that can be taken. Are there other executive orders or non-legislative actions that can be taken to make it more difficult to get these rebates and tax credits?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the administration is coming in with a bit of a chip on its shoulder in the sense of, one of the first provisions that the Biden administration did through executive order was halt the production of the XL pipeline. And support it or oppose it, that was a very clear, strong statement about where they're headed. This incoming administration is going to do something very similar on energy. Now, I do think it'll be focused more on opening up federal lands, Alaska, some of the other areas that the Biden administration has cordoned off, moving forward with leases in the Gulf of Mexico, that sort of thing on oil and gas drilling. But you also can see a scenario where they're also going to come out against something on the renewable side. I honestly don't think it's going to be solar. One, because it's just so popular. Everybody loves solar. Everybody loves a sunny day. And Trump's never said anything really bad about solar other than it takes up too much land. He has said a number of things about wind. And so I do think offshore wind in particular is probably going to be hit hardest. And that is going to be kind of on the permitting side. They can slow down all the interconnections and other things that are required for offshore wind to be constructed and built. But I think it's probably going to be on that portion of the renewable energy industry rather than on solar, to be honest with you, Barry, just simply because it's easier, it's bigger, it's something that Trump has already talked about very clearly, and it gives him a big W from, kind of early on that he's playing tough and supporting the oil and gas industry, but not coming out and really taking out solar in a way that is very popular for homeowners.
So, with all of these possibilities in mind, what is your advice for homeowners who are looking for putting in solar and storage? What should they wait? Should they act right away? Roll the dice? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think if you step back and say, okay, what are these tariffs, broadly going to do for anything, right? You read these articles, you should go buy a computer, buy a flat screen TV, get all of the various consumer goods that you can that are going to be anywhere from 25 to 100% more expensive when the administration comes in. And they're going to put those tariffs in very, very quickly. So it really then comes down to, the panels, where they're coming from. Do you think Southeast Asia modules are going to, be facing stiff tariffs? I think the answer is yes. But, what can you do about acquiring them now? Batteries, the same thing. Are you going with a US manufactured product or something from overseas? So the price could be going up quite a bit. And then, of course, there could be modifications to the credits themselves with respect to the eligibility to get the full 30%. So my personal take, and this is what I've talked to family members about during Thanksgiving, and certainly what we're doing is to put solar up now. Just move forward, contract with it in 2024, get in the queue. It's going to be difficult to install all the resi solar that we want to by January 20th. But I think if people want to maximize the value of their solar, to utilize the tax credits fully, an appropriate risk management approach would be to contract and install them as soon as possible.
Yeah, well, that's the music to everybody's ears in the solar industry, and that's the advice that we're handing out to our customers is act now. I mean, you're probably going to be good for the tax credit, almost certainly, I think, in 2025, but 2026, it's kind of questionable. And I've really never, ever spoken to a customer who said, oh, I shouldn't have installed solar now, or I put in too many solar panels. They're always happy they did it. Electric rates are only going in one direction. So, yeah, it's good advice.
Well, it is. It's a hedge against rising energy bills. We've seen that certainly over the last 6 years. But think about the role that artificial intelligence is going to play in this country in a lot of different ways, but one of just is purely in energy consumption. They say there's a quadrupling of energy demand that's going to happen by 2029 coming from AI use, which are all of these data centers. It's going to be absolutely massive. You've got, groups like Amazon who are going to go with modular nuclear reactors. That's great, but that's still going to take 5 or 10 years to ultimately get built out. And so we, as the residential consumer and also C&I consumers, are going to be facing higher and higher bills just because of the peaking plants that are going to be required in order to come on and provide baseload electricity to run these things. New plants for sure, but it's going to be more expensive electricity in the future. So doing it now not only utilizes the tax credits, but also maximizes your savings as an energy consumer.
All right. Well, you mentioned, talking to friends and family over the dining room table about our industry. Anybody in your family planning on following you into solar and renewable energy?
Hopefully my son is. He had a good internship last year with Roth Capital and Jesse and his whole team, which is great. But we'll see. We'll have that conversation over Christmas.
That would be the best bank. Jesse and his team over there, Andrew, Janet, everybody else, they really helped us a lot when we went public. So hats off to them. Yeah. So let's get out of the business talk. What do you do for fun?
A couple of different things. So I've recently gotten into open water swimming with a couple of other guys from the solar industry. And we do this long distance swim up in northern Vermont every summer. And so there's a lot of just planning and conditioning and working out in order to be able to jump in the cold water and swim for miles. So certainly that's been kind of a fun athletic piece of it. The other thing, I've just been fixing up an old house out in the Chesapeake Bay. Beautiful little spot, just great crabbing and oystering and fishing and just, kind of removing myself a little bit from the chaos of Washington, D.C., which I'm still very active in. And then, raising the kids and pushing forward solar energy wherever we can.
All right. That's terrific. Well, how can people get in touch with you?
I think the best way to reach out to me is just Rhone, RHONE, at solarlytics.net. Probably the easiest, or through LinkedIn. Certainly connect with me that way. I mean, one of the things I will tell you, Barry, is I've always maintained Advanced Energy Advisors. We're a consulting practice in DC that helps companies navigate the complex issues in and around trade, in around tax, in around basically Washington policy. And so I always have a couple of clients that I'll take on in order to help them get through this stuff, especially if they're coming into the United States as a foreign company or if they're a U.S. company trying to figure out exactly which direction is headed. And, with this administration, I think it's going to be critical to know almost on a daily basis where the federal government is headed in order to manage the risks of your business and where you're going forward. So reach out to me at Solarlytics or through LinkedIn. It's probably the best way. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and there's more need for that insight and advice than ever before. So thanks, Rhone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for everybody else who tuned in. If you missed any of today's show, you can always go to the Energy Show website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.
This episode of The Energy Show was proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.